with you. Could you introduce yourself and tell me how you'd like to be accredited in the programme?
Yes, so I'm Helen Greaves and I'm a researcher at the University College London.
And Camille?
Hi, I'm Camille. I'm a postdoc at the University of St Andrews, and I work on acoustic freshwater sounds and underwater sounds.
So yeah, I'm Tom Fisher, working under the name Action Pyramid. I'm a sound artist and musician. My particular area of interest is sort of listening to kind of unheard environments and trying to reinterpret kind of hidden elements of our surroundings in my work.
David?
Yeah, I'm David Delahaye. I also work with sound and music, and I'm a part-time music technician at Newcastle University. And yeah, just interested in the role of sound in widening our understanding of freshwater habitats.
My name is Jack Greenhalgh, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Bristol, studying freshwater ecoacoustics and all the weird and bizarre sounds in ponds and rivers. So I think first of all, we should start really by highlighting exactly how important freshwater ecosystems are. So Helen, if I could come to you, could you just give us an outline of the significance of freshwater ecosystems?
Sure, yeah, there's loads of significance, but are we talking particularly on ponds in this case?
I think we should, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, fantastic. So there's, in terms of freshwater ecosystems, ponds are particularly important. They support at least 2/3 of aquatic taxa native in the UK. And researchers found that they support much greater biodiversity, so much greater plants and wildlife than any other habitats. They also provide connectivity in the landscape and act as refuges as well. So loads of things that are useful for wildlife, but in the past they've also been useful for humans, for industry, for irrigation, livestock, and today they're really fantastic blue spaces in urban areas.
And are freshwater ecosystems and ponds in particular under threat at the moment? What are the main pressures that are facing these ecosystems?
So if we think about anthropogenic stresses, or the stresses caused by humans, that is the greatest threat. So we've got things like chemical pollution, biological threats, which would be perhaps invasive non-native species, physical threats such as infilling of them. If they're not valued, they will be filled in. Management and climate warming, which I think is what we're focusing on today.
Yeah, absolutely. So what is it in particular about the effects of climate change that are causing negative outcomes in ponds? I mean, is it species loss, or is it the release of carbon? Or I mean, what in particular is it about climate change that's really the problem for ponds?
Yeah, so there's a number of different problems related to climate change and the effects that it has on ponds. So in terms of species, if we think about what species will live there, if the climate changes, then those species will move to different areas. So that has an effect on them. They also, what we're finding in the research that we're doing on this Ponderful project at the moment is that we're looking across Europe. And in the areas in the lower part of Europe where it's hotter, we're finding more and more ponds that are dry. So actually, when we started to look for ponds to study, a number of partners went out in springtime and they were already dry. So ponds will eventually dry out if it becomes drier. So yeah, that's a big effect as well.
Right, and we can see this effect happening, right, with it, everything drying out and all the species disappearing. But also increasingly, we're now understanding that we can hear the effects of these things as well. So there is this new field of research called ecoacoustics, which is the marriage of ecology and acoustics together in order to study ecosystems and address ecological questions. And it's been quite well documented in marine and in terrestrial environments. But not so much in fresh waters. So Camille, could I just turn to you briefly to just give us a bit more background on this new field of freshwater ecoacoustics?
Sure. Well, it's it's a very mysterious and new world that we're uncovering by recording underwater. We know that there's a number of different species that produce sounds underwater. The main groups are fish, invertebrates, mainly insects, amphibians, of course, which you're probably most familiar with, and crustaceans, which are also invertebrates. And so actually there is, we estimate the number of insect species in underwater to produce sounds at about a few hundreds. In France, I estimated that number to about 250 species. But we only know very little. Those sounds have not been really described. So there's a lot to do still in that area.
Yeah, I mean, some of the research I've been doing is around in a similar vein. Has been interesting in the sense that I've noticed a lot of species identification guides and books used to identify beetles and water boatmen actually focus on different sound producing anatomy. So there's evidence there in those old guidebooks that these animals must be producing different sounds. We just haven't got around to getting out and recording them yet.
Yeah, absolutely. There's they use the stridulatory organs to identify the species, but those sounds haven't been described yet. So yeah, it's a world to discover.
Could you explain a little bit more detail about some of your current research?
Sure. So right now I'm working on a few different projects. One that I'm very excited about is the sound of plants. We found a few years ago that plants produce sounds when they're producing oxygen bubbles. And so we're trying to... Sorry?
That's incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah, so this summer we had mesocosms, and we put 4 different plant species in those mesocosms and recorded them. And we also had controls with just a pot without any plant and a pot with dirt or silt. And we found that those 2 controls were completely silent, but the others had activity during the day, and those sounds didn't seem to differ much between species. So we're looking into more fine details of the acoustics to see whether we can find whether there are species differences between plants. Yeah, so that's my ongoing exciting project. But I'm also working on more global soundscape questions, looking at timing, dynamics of the soundscape, and also spatial dynamics. So that's ongoing projects.
Oh, fascinating. David, you've also been recording the sounds of insects and plants as well in particular, but for a slightly different purpose.
Yeah, so I guess I've been recording these the ponds for a number of years, and I never, there's the abundance of sound that you can find underwater is fascinating, and when I started to learn about the fact that it's really hard to describe what exactly these sounds, where the sounds are coming from, what are emitting them, and so but part of my fascination is just using the sounds that we're capturing underwater and then creating pieces of sound, essentially sound art from them, or ecologically inspired sound works. So to try and raise awareness really of what's going on, just literally on our doorstep. Some of these sounds can almost be quite exotic in sounds, can inspire the sounds of rainforests and things like this. but then, you know, we don't need to travel to the other side of the world to listen to them. We can literally find them in our garden ponds, and I find that really fascinating. And it gave a lot of focus and solace, I guess, when during lockdown, just to visit, you know, these places and have a bit of escapism through those listening experiences.
Yeah, I did the same, and I think many of us did. And also, I think recording sounds of the ponds and also sharing them in this creative way is just such a fantastic way of highlighting the amazing biodiversity that's in ponds, because it's something actually that not a lot of people are aware of, just how rich and full of life these ecosystems are.
Yeah, and even to the point where you know sometimes it's the ponds that you find, you know, in very urban environments are often very active as well. You don't, you know, so these can be really easily accessible.
So you're saying that these natural sounds that you've been recording have inspired some works of sound art. Could you explain or give us some examples of those types of sound art that you've created?
Yeah, so I mean, I a recent piece, I guess, was I have a background in performing in many folk music bands and touring around playing that. So I kind of I'm feeling that there's a good kind of relationship between folk music and its relationship to the landscape, and, you know, telling stories of the land, but also then exploring that from an artistic perspective, from a freshwater perspective. So I've been working a lot with taking these kind of unheard freshwater sounds and merging them with folk music, regional folk musics, and, you know, my approach with the natural sounds I'm recording is to always kind of pull out the natural details within the sound rather than being overly manipulative of the sounds. And that kind of stems from a more kind of sort of a documentation approach, I guess, to audio sampling, rather than sampling for to then manipulate into more human driven art forms, I guess. So, you know, I could make hip hop with this stuff, but I don't. I try and let it breathe in its own way, but merge in other elements of regional musics that could be heard terrestrially around these ponds.
I kind of want to hear a hip hop album now of all the sounds in ponds.
You know, Simon Link made was it Fish Techno? That was quite good.
Sounds, you know, those plant sounds that you were describing earlier, Camille, are so repetitive, aren't they? And they are really punchy sounding. So you could quite imagine there's a full on rave going on down there somewhere. But yeah, that's for another time. You can credit me as DJ Grandmaster Delahaye or something like that.
Actually, one of the porters in the Life Sciences building here at Bristol is a DJ in his spare time, and I gave him some of these plant and insect sounds, and he made a drum and bass song or track. I guess drum and bass track. Yeah,
I'm a big fan of drum and bass, so yeah, send that through.
But speaking of making albums, Tom is currently making an album of the daily acoustic activity cycle in freshwater, because we're in ponds. So tell us about that, Tom.
Yeah, sure. It's interesting because it's touching on what David was just mentioning about this sort of need. I feel like I want to be honest to these recordings, and I want to sort of present them rather than manipulate them too much. So it's a kind of balance between sort of presenting it in a sort of form which we can enjoy and which is like got an appeal to people, but is true to the sound sources. And yeah, I've been quite trying to be quite rigorous on that approach. But yeah, it stems from this sort of discovery me and Jack had spoken about of the daily cycle of a pond, and they do vary pond to pond, but this idea that as Camille mentioned as well, you've got this sort of daytime activity of the plants, and then it can be often at night you have more of the insect activity, and just sort of trying to create this like ideal day in the life of a pond as a soundscape, and sort of separate it into tracks using that as a sort of compositional approach. I've just been at the moment it's pretty much finished, and hopefully we've got to have a listen to majority of that following this chat. It's kind of an ongoing just fascination with this. Like we're all interested in this just so much. I think I like the mystery of it as well. I love the mystery as well as what we do know. It just feels like this complete. It doesn't always work, so, as you know, sometimes you put a hydrophone in and there's not so much going on, but it's those moments where you do just capture these just absolutely unworldly sounds. And just that's kind of what drives me to create stuff and hopefully inspire other people, I guess.
Yeah, there's so many mysteries left to discover.
Yeah. Also, I think you're right. You're quite right with the temporal dynamics. It's sometimes I would put a hydrophone in a pond, think there's nothing going on, and then just leave it overnight, and then there's a whole new world coming up. So.
And I agree as well with that serendipitous nature of going out with the hydrophone clay. So you never know if there's going to be anything going on, but that kind of sparks the curiosity and wanting to go out there and listen to the natural world, I guess. So.
Yeah, I think you had a really good point as well, David. It's brilliant that you don't need to go across the world. I've done a few kind of artist residencies, and then you find that you don't need to travel all that far to have these absolutely exotic sounding, like incredible things on your doorstep. It's pretty inspiring.
I think that's really true, isn't it? I mean, still, your original sampling work, Tom, comparing the overgrown ponds that are, coming to the end of their life, and then the open ponds that are, flourishing. I use that sound track the other evening just on a talk with the local wildlife group, and it really does inspire them. So the work that you guys are all doing just really demonstrates biodiversity in such a way that people can grasp, and like you say, it's just there on your doorstep, so it's really exciting.
Yeah, I think there's something about sound as well. It has quite a visceral impact. It's more than a graph or a picture or anything really. It's because the kind of immediacy of the format, it just has this like quite striking thing when you have like the difference, and something like that is obviously quite effective.
Yeah, I read somewhere about the sound is internalized. We kind of resonate with it, and therefore it becomes kind of penetrates our body and our ears, and has it's a bit more of a I feel it has a bit more of a sublime kind of impact, like you said, a visceral impact. And as an art form, that's its power as far as I'm concerned. So. Also, as the first sense we develop, it's quite potent.
What's really interesting here as well is that the work that you're all doing now, I feel like we're coming full circle in terms of sound and what you were talking about in terms of folk music that you're doing, David, because if we think about the ponds that we particularly look at, or the work that Tom has done with UCL and Jack, they're marl pits, and they were actually dug out, and there was lots of folk music that surrounded the digging out of a marl pit and the excitement of doing that. So there was songs that went with this, and music and dances, and the fact that we're then sort of coming through the life of a pond. They've been there for hundreds of years since they were dug out, and now we're celebrating them with music again. It's really, really captivating. I'm excited to hear what everybody's produced.
That element was featured in my hidden sounds piece, because a lot of the sites where I was recording were used to be, I'm based up in County Durham, and a lot of them were pits of various sorts, coal pits or gravel pits, and there used to be areas of industrialized work really, but now they've been sort of sunk and flooded, and become these habitats for wildlife. But as you said, the songs kind of are still in the imagination, I guess, of in that landscape. So it kind of gives a continuation of some sort. Yeah,
it's really beautiful. I love it.
All this wonderful diversity that we've highlighted with the recordings and the art and the science is a threat, of course, by the ever increasing temperatures, global temperatures, and the severity of climate change. And if we're seeing it, Helen, like you're saying, with the Ponderful project in Spain, it makes you think, how long is it until we start seeing similar effects in the UK? So with that in mind, I just wondered what you thought about COP26 more generally, and whether you're optimistic, basically.
Absolutely. So to go back to that first question of, are we seeing it in the UK? Well, yes, we're already seeing it in the UK. And, you know, the work that we do restoring ponds is so vital in terms of bringing water back to the landscape. So we know that these ponds that we look at that are very overgrown really do dry out. And if you want to maintain water in the landscape, they do need to be dug out, restored, and to bring that biodiversity back that you guys, you know, listen to in your research. So yeah, it's definitely happening. We definitely need to all pull together and work together as a collective on this, and more research needs to happen, which is, you know, really exciting why the Ponderful project is happening across Europe. But yeah, it's you know, we all need to pull together, not blame each other, and, you know, work as a collective moving forward, I think.
Absolutely, and there's hope. I mean, this Norfolk Pond project, the restoring of old ponds, shows that just with an afternoon's work, you can bring back stunning degrees of biodiversity. So we can make a difference.
Absolutely, everybody can make a difference. You know, landowners can make a difference by doing this, you know, finding out more information about restoring ponds. As you say, the Norfolk Ponds project has restored over 200 ponds in Norfolk, and this is now going wider across the UK, and pond creations as well. So there are definitely things that we can do to maintain fresh, clean water in the landscape and create biodiversity habitats. So yeah, and all this will regulate and maintain ecosystems functions in and prevent that kind of vulnerability to climate change. So it'll maintain that as climate change, you know, does happen in the future.
Yeah, I mean, what is everyone else's thoughts about the conference? Are you optimistic about some of the outcomes that might result from it, or are you just totally apathetic? And, you know, not apathetic, but you just think that you know, these world leaders are never going to actually enact any change that will be tangible?
I think, me personally, I'm slightly cautious of the performative aspect of people gathering, but with a really good intention. I don't want to be cynical, but I am hopeful, and I think it's, you know, it's nothing but a positive thing that all these people from, you know, that can together could potentially make this difference. But I really hope it's not all just talk. But that's my personal takeaway on it.
Yeah, let's see some action.
Yeah, exactly. It's enough talking, so we need to do something.
It's really interesting because I remember being at college, and I remember back, you know, that's a long time ago now, and I remember thinking, you know, it's all very well. What we need to do if we want, you know, people to develop industry in a, you know, an eco-friendly ways, we need to give them the technology that we already have. And there's a lot of sort of blaming of China at the moment and like the developing nations. But, you know, you think back to our industrial revolution, you know, if we could have, well, we can look at evidence in paleo records and in ponds. In fact, we can see where there was, you know, periods of high industry and coal. That's actually recorded in the layers of paleo records. So we can see where we've done, you know, worse things in terms of, you know, emitting fossil fuels and things like using fossil fuels. And we do need to, I think, start to pass that technology on if we're really serious about that.
Yeah, good point. Okay, well, I think we're coming towards the end of our discussion here. So I'd just like to thank you all very much for coming along and for talking about this. It's obviously a very important issue, and freshwater ecosystems and ponds in particular are really often overlooked, aren't they? So good to show them some love.
Absolutely.
Yeah, as you said, in relation to what might be changing, is I just hope that everything at COP26 isn't just words or that there are some action, and that people are actually listening, I guess, is the important thing.